An interesting system has been used for capturing monkeys in the jungles of Africa. The goal is to take the monkeys alive and unharmed for shipment to zoos across the world. In an extremely humane way, the captors use heavy bottles with long, narrow necks into which they deposit a sweet-smelling banana. The bottles are dropped on the jungle floor, and the captors return the next morning to find a monkey trapped next to each bottle. A story about monkey traps and our reading from Luke's Gospel have something in common. Let's take a look. Leisurely, large, loaded. That's the less than flattering snapshot of today's average American taken from the Statistical Abstract of the United States. Recently released by the U.S. Census Bureau, this 1,300-page tale of too much reports statistical trends across numerous sectors of American life. And in short, we live a super-size-me life. We are media saturated. Americans will spend nearly 10 hours a day either watching television, surfing the internet, reading books, newspapers and magazines, talking or texting on the phone, or listening to music this year. It's easy to ignore this by wondering how those lazy people waste all their time, but don't discount that devotional reading this morning, the MP3 on while commuting, and all the emails that were sent today. All these things factor into the picture of the average American with the means, the technology, and the time for 10 hours of media connection a day. It adds up quickly. We are overfed. Foreign travelers are stunned when they visit the United States and see the shape of our shape. The abstract confirms what is obvious by walking our streets. 2/3 of Americans are overweight, 1/3 of whom are medically obese. To compare our 1/3 to the rest of the planet, the World Health Organization estimates that while 1/3 of the planet is well-fed, 1/3 is underfed, and 1/3 is starving. A woman visited Cambodia on a mission trip to an orphanage there. In one blog entry, she writes about fat water. She says, "The people in the cities will not drink bottled water. We drink nothing but bottled water because the water here isn't filtered. The reason Cambodians won't drink bottled water is because they see all the Western tourists drinking it. They think it's the bottled water that makes us fat." They may be onto something. They're drinking bad water, which probably has a parasite or two in it. We aren't getting the parasites that so many Westerners could probably benefit from, to lose weight. The census report noted that Americans drink about a gallon of soda a week, along with a half gallon each of milk, coffee, and beer. If you total the calories in a week's worth of these beverages, we spend nearly a day and a half's allowance of calories just on our drinks. And that generously assumes we take our coffee black, as opposed to 25% of a day's calories going to each venti mocha one consumes. It adds up quickly. We're rich. The abstract throws some big numbers around when it comes to how we save and spend our money. Half of U.S. households own stocks and bonds, which seems reasonable until you realize that 1.1 billion people worldwide live on less than $1 a day. And yet, we feel poor, especially given that the average American family's net worth dropped 40% between 2007 and 2010, from $126,400 to $77,300. That loss in net worth, however, was due primarily to an inflated housing market bubble that burst. $77,300 sounds so much less than $126,400, And yet we overlook that the average Indonesian or Indian family's net worth totals $1,400 and $1,100 respectively. But to measure our excess wealth with a simple indicator, in a recent year, Americans bought 2.1 billion pairs of imported shoes. That's an average of 7 pairs per person. Satisfying the world's yearly sanitation and food requirements, making sure everyone has clean water and enough food to drink, would only cost $13 billion. That's the amount that people of the United States and the European Union spend annually on perfume. Again, it adds up quickly. The truth be told, we're possessed by our possessions. Instead of a means to an end, they become an end in themselves. When we hold this statistical abstract in front of us, we barely recognize ourselves. The average Joe or Jane American looks like a fat, rich fool at this point. Unless the Census Bureau is lying to us, we have only one conclusion. We are the most over-consuming people on God's earth. We're a culture of stuffed barns. Stuffed barns. Where did we come across that earlier? Oh, right, here in this text where Jesus takes up the issue of greed and accumulation after someone asked him to play arbitrator in a family inheritance squabble. Jesus rhetorically asked who made him judge of the man's fiscal fighting, and then immediately acts as judge of his soul. Jesus then tells a story, what's called the parable of the rich fool, to illustrate his point. He begins with a man possessed of his possessions, a rich farmer who had a bumper crop of a harvest. Faced with increasing fortunes and possessions, the man pondered his next move. Notice the personal pronouns in this brief passage. I, my, I, my, I, my, I, my. He has received an incredible blessing, but all he can think about is himself. He's possessed by his possessions. So he decides to build bigger barns to store his blessing away for many years. The irony in this story that Jesus tells is that the man prepared to sock away his blessing for the future is that very night required to give a final accounting to God. God comes to repossess what is his, and Jesus asks, "And these things you have prepared, whose will they be?" In other words, you can't take it with you. To the inheritance question, Jesus asked a question, reminding his hearers that God comes to repossess all of us. While Jesus' parable about the rich fool should make most of us a little uncomfortable, we typically consider him some kind of ultra-rich Donald Trump figure. But he's not. He's just the Census Bureau's average American when compared to the rest of the world. If he were living today's census abstract averages, he'd be 30 pounds overweight and watching his $2,500 flat-screen TV. Let's be honest. The biggest challenge here is to find ourselves in this parable. The abundance of possessions is so subtle and culturally accepted that it goes by largely unnoticed. The tension we face in this text is that nobody in the church thinks this parable applies to us. But all of us are rich by any measure. Consider the number of self-storage facilities around us, the larger barns of our days, if you will. They're a booming business in our country and have only proliferated in our neighborhoods over the last 10 years or so. Investors can't build these self-storage units fast enough. They provide safe, temperature-controlled environments into which to store our stuff for which we have no room at home. If you compare America with the UK or Australia, we have 10 times more storage space per person than they do. Americans are building bigger barns, and they frequently look like storage units. To those of us possessed by our possessions, Jesus asks a question. And these things you have prepared, whose will they be? God will come and repossess us at some point and ask us questions too. Someone sent me a list of 10 things God won't ask on that day, and the assumptions behind the questions themselves reflect a wealthy audience. God won't ask what kind of car you drove, but how many people you drove who didn't have transportation. God won't ask the square footage of your house, but how many people you welcomed into your house. God won't ask in what neighborhood you lived, but how you treated your neighbors. God won't ask about the color of your skin, but the content of your character. God won't ask about the clothes you had in your closet, but how many people you helped clothe. God won't ask how many friends you had, but how many people you befriended. God won't ask what your highest salary was, but whether you compromised your character to obtain it. God won't ask what your job was, but whether you performed to the best of your ability. God won't ask how many promotions you received, but how you promoted others. God won't ask about the possessions you had on earth, but the treasure that you laid up in heaven. You can't take it with you, but you can send it forward by being rich toward God. And as Proverbs 19:17 promises, whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord and will be repaid in full. You can't take it with you, but you can send it forward. There will come a time of accounting for all of us when we are repossessed by our Creator. Knowing what's coming in our future, we can make changes in the present. Whether in many years or this very night, this parable nudges us to look at the world differently and change our actions accordingly. We must choose to reject comparisons that lead to desires for the newer and the nicer. In the book Death by Suburb, Christian author David Getz discusses how comparison fuels accumulation in the suburban life. He says, the suburbs seem to promote a kind of vigilance on the possession of others. It seems to be more than just good old-fashioned coveting. It's ubiquitous, heightened vigilance, roving eyes like a sentinel, eternally on point to compare myself to those I perceive have more than I do. I'm always weighing my immortality symbols against others. This is what Jesus is warning us about when he says to be on your guard against all kinds of greed. He knows the appetite for more is subtle. So he says, be intentional in looking out for it. The Western life of success and excess needs a theological adjustment. The problem with the rich fool in this parable is not that he was wealthy or that he had a great harvest. The problem was he didn't understand the spiritual reality behind all that he had. That's what this parable, if we let it, can do. Help us truly see reality from God's perspective. This parable and the entire Bible resonates with a reality that leads to a consistent ethic, how we are to act given the prior reality. The reality is we are given to, and the ethic that follows is, so that we might give to others. We are blessed to be a blessing. We are loved to love others. We are reconciled to be reconcilers. We are forgiven to be forgivers. The problem with greed and accumulation is that rich fools then and now forget that blessings are intended to be used to bless others. That's one of the reasons we have an annual stewardship drive, to remind us that our blessings are intended to bless others. That by investing in a youth associate position, we not only bless our children, but the children of our surrounding community. That by investing in construction, we not only bless our congregation, but our neighbors. Our mission is to bless others, and we have an annual opportunity through our choices to invest in God's blessing of our community. Have you ever seen the bumper stickers on people's cars, "God bless America"? That's patriotic, but the massive oversight is that God has already blessed America. It's like, what are we asking for here? When we look at our reality against the reality of the world around us, we realize how much we are the farmers building bigger barns. Instead of asking God to bless America, we need to ask how America can be a blessing to the world through our choices, through our actions, through our decisions. Knowing God will repossess us, we needn't be possessed by our possessions. There is another way. It's called being dispossessed. Here's some practical antidotes to our barn-building ways, so that we may be dispossessed of our possessions and rich toward God. Go through your clothes once a year. If you didn't wear a piece that year, give it away. Consider shared, not exclusive ownership of possessions with neighbors. Do two homes really need two lawnmowers? Sharing possessions combats accumulation and builds relationships with those outside the church. Make two lists, one of needs and one of wants for your life. Purchase only from the need list for the rest of the year. Look at the monthly expenses of the following: charitable giving versus clothing, eating out, hobbies, entertainment, etc. Do the amounts need to change? If you have a storage unit, consolidate your belongings and bring them back into your home. For the next month, every time you appreciate something that somebody else has, stop to pray for your own contentment with how you have been blessed. Christmas shopping starts soon. Declare a tight price limit on family presents. Go with a no-gift Christmas, or spend as much sponsoring a local shelter as you do on gifts. Knowing the reality of God's future repossession of us, that we truly are blessed, we can act accordingly and bless others. We needn't be possessed by our possessions. but dispossessed, and thus become rich toward God. All of this brings us back to the monkey traps. Heavy, long-necked bottles with a banana at the bottom. Invariably, these traps will catch monkeys. How do they work? The monkey, attracted by the aromatic scent of the banana, comes to investigate the bottle, grabs for the banana, and is trapped. The monkey can't take its hand out of the bottle as long as it's holding the banana, but is unwilling to open its hand to let it go. The bottle's too heavy to carry away, so the monkey is trapped. So we have a choice when it comes to possessions, whether to grab on so tightly we're trapped by them, or to let go of them and place them in the hands of those who need them more than we do, like the youth of our congregation and our community. And by placing them in their hands, we're really returning them to God, who gave them first to us. Thanks be to God for Jesus, through whom we are blessed to be a blessing. Amen.